They took away the microphone, so if anyone who's in here is interested in this specific panel, it's probably helpful if you sit closer.
Hey, I just need to follow.
Or you can act like all your students stress you out as far away as possible.
But I just wanted to tell you.
I'll see you.
Okay.
Can I sit there?
Yes.
Good.
Of course.
Thanks.
All right, so we'll get started. We're running a little bit late. I apologize. We try to let some more people trickle in. My name is Joe Leeson-Chalk. For those of you who haven't met me, I've been emailing some of you. I'd like to thank you all for coming to the conference, making the trip to Binghamton. We will have hospitality provided throughout, sort of right outside. If you're looking for extra areas to hang out, room 154 is available and open for us. It's just like it's just a big table area that we can hang out in, as well as an anthropology lounge area that some people have been using. So feel free to make use of that. If someone wants to grab some quick food, just right out there, there's an Einstein's Bagels, but we'll also have hospitality throughout, and there'll be lunches provided both days, as well as a breakfast spread and everything like that. So I really appreciate you all coming. Amber George, who's the Director of Finance, she will talk to you about some of the logistical things going on for the conference, and then we'll give you a brief history, and then we'll get some of the panel started. All right.
Welcome. So great to see you all. Some of you are familiar faces. I remember from me last year. Excuse me. Yeah. So as far as registration goes, I think all of you are pretty well registered. But if you have any difficulties with any of that, or you haven't registered yet, you might want to see me about that. Otherwise, I just want to welcome you and just remind you that this is, completely voluntary group organizers, and we appreciate your patience and understanding, especially with the mugs. I know there was some discussion about how the mugs aren't necessarily the most eco-friendly, but we're doing this with the hope that, we're trying to cut down on our excess waste and other processes of using cups and papers and things like that. So please remember to bring your mugs back and use them again for tomorrow and Sunday. And again, if you should need anything, you can always stop me and ask me, and I'd be happy to help you. Welcome.
So as she said, this is a fully volunteer conference. We've been putting it on for 14 years. The first year was at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, and the whole idea was bringing different movements together and different struggles together. We still do that to this day. So we're going to be focusing on a rally tomorrow from 1:30 to 2. Students wanted to do something on this campus, so Students for Change are wanting to do something around Black Lives Matter and police brutality issues. And so we're going to be meeting out there in Pegasus, which doesn't look like a Pegasus. It's very artistic. It's just like a wooden sculpture in front of the library. So that'll be right at lunch. So we'll do that for like a half hour, and then come in and eat. Hopefully everyone kind of participates, and it's really exciting. And they're like organizing it right now, and we'll be doing that tomorrow. But every year we always have a hiccup or so. So please work with us. this conference started with, a lot of radical politics, and now, we don't have, the ATF videoing us in the back, and certain people, protesting are, from the section society, like, protesting us. So we're moving and we're progressing, and it's really exciting that we only had one phone call to Joe from risk management, which is a lot better than the years in the past. So yeah, if you want to know a little bit more about the organization and how you all can get involved in North America.
Oh yeah, Amy. So I'm Kelly. It's really nice to see so many of you. I'm taking over, I guess, as North American director, so I'm going to help out, I'll be in touch if you want to suggest things for next year's conference. Or find me, I'll leave it all in. And I do respond quickly to emails. I'm not on Facebook. I have to write my dissertation. So, with that being said, email me, please.
Right, so going on in this room will be a roundtable on critical animal studies and the role of educators, and 158 will be a panel on morality in relationship to the non-human, and so there's one person Skyping in there as well. So please choose the room that you'd like to go to.
I guess I'm going to moderate our panel. We're missing some people. So I will begin introducing people. This is Karen Davis. She is founder and president of United Poultry Concerns. It was founded in 1990. This year is their 25th anniversary. And prior to that, she was with the English department at the University of Maryland for 12 years. And then I'm going to introduce everyone, and then we'll let Karen begin. And the panel is about the role of educators and how we deal with the issue of critical animal studies, in case you were just comfortable and didn't feel like getting up and didn't know what was happening here. To my left is Kim Socha. She has a PhD in literature and criticism. She's the author of Animal Liberation and Atheism, as well as
Women Destruction in the Avant-Garde, a Paradigm for Animal Liberation.
It's always too much for me to remember.
I didn't put it on the
And she's currently, can I say what she's? Oh yeah, she's currently a professor at Normandale Community College in Bloomington, Minnesota, and she is an organizer with Progress for Science, which focuses on ending vivisection in higher education and beyond. Then Anthony Nichella is an education professor at St. Cloud University, so Minnesota is heavily represented here. He is co-founder of the Institute of Critical Animal Studies, which we all have to thank for this conference, as well as the organization Save the Kids. And he's edited about approximately 20, perhaps more, volumes on issues ranging from the Animal Liberation Front to the School to Prison Top Line, hip-hop pedagogy, eco-ability, and the animal enterprise terrorism act, which will be a panel on later. And I'm on it, so I should know how to say it, but then I'll let someone else.
Okay. This is Karen Lester. She is assistant professor of sociology at Minnesota State University Mankato, and she is also co-founder and organizer with Progress for Science again. And for the section,
And now we'll let Karen begin.
Okay, well, thank you for being here, and I'm delighted to be here myself. Again, as Carol introduced me, I'm Karen Davis. I'm the founder and president of United Poultry Concerns, which is a national nonprofit organization that promotes the compassionate and respectful treatment of chickens, turkeys, ducks, and other domesticated fowl. And I'm going to talk to you about several things that have been part of my experience as a dedicated animal advocate and activist since 1983, because through the 1980s I was a kind of apprentice in all of the various campaigns and efforts on behalf of a huge spectrum of animal abuse situations, and finally I kind of narrowed down my particular focus to the plight of farmed animals, because they do represent 95% or more of all abused animals on the planet. And because I've had a lifelong affinity for birds, even though I did not grow up around chickens and turkeys, when I met a chicken named Viva, whose story is on our table out there that I hope you'll visit, it's kind of down the hall and around the corner, she was very, very instrumental in my decision to start an organization that would focus on the largest number of abused land animals in the farming enterprise, which is chickens. They represent 98 or more percent of all land animals being raised and slaughtered for food in the United States. So, a few things about myself. I often get the question from people, even now, 25 years later, do you miss teaching? And my answer is, no. I spend every day of my life teaching. That's what I do. They mean, do you miss being literally in the classroom? And I loved being in the classroom when I was. And I still go into college classrooms from time to time and give presentations around the country. So I haven't completely lost that connection, and I'm here at Binghamton today. So no, I never lost that connection. In addition, I have published numerous books: Prison Chickens, Poisoned Eggs, an inside look at the modern poultry industry, More Than a Meal, The Turkey in History, Myth, Ritual, and Reality, The Holocaust and the Handmaid's Tale, A Case for Comparing Atrocities, a children's book, A Home for Henny, and even a vegan cookbook, Instead of Chicken, Instead of Turkey, A Poultryless Poultry Potpourri. And I have contributed chapters to many academic books focusing on social justice issues or specifically on animal liberation issues. In 1989, I founded the Animal Rights Coalition at the University of Maryland in College Park. And the three people who were the first students who attended our first meeting stayed with us through the entire 3 years that I continued to run the organization. I don't know how many of you have heard of Frank Perdue. How many people? Anybody? Well, our biggest campaign at the University of Maryland, it even got into the New York Times and Time magazine, was to try to get Frank Perdue off the Board of Regents at the University of Maryland. We did not get him off the Board of Regents. We didn't really think we could. But we made that the dominant issue in the Diamondback, the student newspaper on campus at the University of Maryland College Park for the entire semester. And one of the most interesting things about that time was how many people who never came to our animal rights meetings, notwithstanding from all the different disciplines on campuses, wrote the most wonderful op-eds and letters to the editor. People we didn't know, from the math department, the computer department, you name it, the physics department, all these sort of points of ironic light on the campus, who shared our views and expanded our views against animal farming, you know, on behalf of a compassionate vegan diet. So all kinds of wonderful things can happen on campuses. A number of years ago, I wrote an essay titled Bringing Animals into the Classroom. It ran in the National Anti-Vivisection Society's bulletin. And there I talk about my experiences bringing animals into my classes. Now, at the University of Maryland, I taught Victorian literature, American literature, I taught technical writing, a special class for nurses who would be going on to the professional schools and had to get their junior writing course over with in their sophomore year. So I am very familiar with, and I have written articles about teaching in the classroom that were published actually in actual English journals. So what I talk about in this article, and what I want to mention briefly to you, is that I found it very easy to bring animals into my classes. That is, animals and animal issues. For example, you always have a curriculum. You're always going to be selecting articles or essays or stories or novels or whatever it is in English that you want your students to read. You're always going to have issues that you're going to want to present. So, of course, one of the ways I brought animals into all of my classes was I always made sure I had really good stories involving animals, along with other excellent stories about other issues. I made sure that among the essays that I asked students to read, that I always had really, really good essays about animals. And one of the ones that I want to mention to you, if you haven't read it, is just so powerful, by Lauren Isley, the anthropologist at the University of Pennsylvania, as I recall. He wrote an essay called The Bird and the Machine in his book, The Immense Journey. I recommend The Immense Journey, the whole book of his essays. But the animal and the machine just blows you away, and the students get totally, totally into it, because he's describing how he was sent on a mission to gather up animals to put into laboratories and museums and so on. And how his experience with one hawk he captured and the mate left behind just completely woke him up to, there's something wrong with this kind of work. And he just writes it so beautifully and just so movingly. So part of what I'm saying is there's nothing like stories to get people's attention. A personal story in the form of an essay, or literally as a piece of fiction or a piece of autobiography or biography, whatever. Because that way you're not just presenting people with abstract concepts. You want to get people moved in their gut, you might want to say, to care. And there's nothing like a powerful story about a particular animal or an experience with a particular animal to move people, to move students. So I also cite my essay, Viva the Chicken Hen, and there are several copies I brought out on our table. And if you go right to our website homepage, you can click it on, you can read it right there as well. Because my essay about Viva has been used in many college classes over the years. And it's the story really of the little chicken I met who was as instrumental as anybody on this planet to bringing me to decide to start United Poultry Concerns. And one of the things about my essay that I know is very good for teaching is that it shows how to write an essay that is emotional without adjectives. Using almost no adjectives, but evoking the life of another being and your experience with her. So I made sure in my classes that I showed my real, I wasn't feigning, my real concern about other social justice issues, because I was very involved in the civil rights movement in the 1960s in Washington, D.C. So I don't just have I didn't just start out with only animal rights, but animal rights for me is part of a concern that really I have felt almost viscerally since as long as I can remember, of animosity and hatred of any kind of abuse of the vulnerable and the helpless and the innocent. So it was very easy for me to transition from the feelings I had in the 1960s when I learned about the horrible mistreatment of black people in the United States, and to become involved in the civil rights movement in the mid-1960s, to easily move naturally into animal rights activism in the 70s and 80s. How much time do I have? 2 minutes. Okay. So again, to conclude on my classroom experience, I found it easy and absolutely necessary to bring animals into the classroom. To me, it's like you have a commitment, you have a passion, you have something you care about. You don't hit people over the head with it, but you communicate to people, your students or whoever you're speaking with, the urgency. This matters. This really matters. And that way, you're not putting people on the defensive. They are more being drawn into what you're showing them, maybe for the first time in their lives. As one of my students wrote here, and I quoted it in this essay. Again, a lot of students said a lot of different things. But one student said, for example, in a survey question, that this course and the manner in which it was taught has broadened my ideas about life and my cohabitation on this planet. So that's the kind of thing we want to do. We want to open people up, and we never want to exclude everyone, because one of the problems in environmentalism has always been that the individual members of the environment don't really count. They only count as members of biosystems or as abstract species. So we always want to get people to see the individual, who is just like us, in a body that can suffer and die, in a world of visceral experience, of sensuous experience, of lived experience that can be better or worse for us. I now run United Poultry Concerns, and I include a sanctuary, which I actually started in 1985, and Vivo was my first resident. I now care for 110 chickens, one peacock, a male peafowl, and 2 male guinea fowl. And it's wonderful to have a sanctuary, because then people can visit your sanctuary. They can actually meet, in our case, our birds. They can get to know them. And when professors like from Salisbury University in Salisbury, Maryland, which is, totally endowed by Frank Perdue. They even have a highway named after Perdue. They have a slaughterhouse at Salisbury University, which also has a Perdue slaughterhouse right on the main highway. But notwithstanding, Tom Horton, who's a writer and formerly with the Baltimore Sun newspaper, and who is very familiar with the chicken industry, he and a colleague of his will bring his students, maybe twice a year, 2 different groups of students from his environmental studies class to meet our birds. And my experience with these students is really good. For most of them have never heard of, they are barely aware of what animal rights is about. They don't know chickens. They've never met somebody like me. They've never met a passionate chicken lady. So now they have. But I have littered. I have a nice pack made up for each student to take home and read at their leisure. As soon as they start meeting the chickens, I give them a little talk in our, sort of like everything. I can't even call it a living room, because it's sort of like a workroom, but it's the front room. So I give them, it's got conference tables and literature and everything all around, and every type of chicken knick-knack in the world, because everybody sends me beautiful artwork about, chicken artwork of all kinds. So I give them a little 10-minute talk about what we're about, why I started United Poultry Concerns, and tell them a few things about the kinds of suffering that chickens endure in the poultry and egg industry, so they know, where these birds are coming from and where we're coming from in being their advocates. And then take them outside, and we walk around, and they ask questions, and I help to elicit from them questions I think they have that maybe they don't quite know how to articulate. And I've never had a group of students come to our sanctuary ever and felt when they left that they were disappointed or that they didn't care. And always Tom Horton, whoever brings the students, always sends their write-ups about their experiences. And I have to say that they're moved by the stories of the chickens, and they're moved by meeting somebody who cares. That just really cares. For whom this isn't just abstract academics, but this is like on the ground, boots on the ground, emotion and advocacy and attention to facts and to making a change. So I think I'm about done yet. There was one other thing. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention this. One of our campaigns, that is one of United Poultry Concerns' important campaigns, which I started in 1994 in response to teachers and parents contacting our organization about all these chicks who were left over after classroom chick hatching projects have been conducted. Or contacting me and our organization about, well, what do we do with this chick? This chick was born deformed, and can you take him? Terrible stories. Of course, this still goes on, but we have this excellent book that we update every couple of years, replacing hatching lessons, alternatives to chick hatching projects, which has a lot of information. It's a lot of activities for students, particularly K through 12, but also older students. Because when it comes to knowing about chickens and birds in general, most people are about a second grade level, no matter how old they are. They don't know anything anyway. And so we put this booklet together. I work very closely with Sheila Schwartz, Dr. Sheila Schwartz, who was an educator, a teacher in the New York City classroom for 30 years. And then she started the Humane Education Committee under the United Federation of Teachers. So she and I worked on this booklet. As I say, this is about our 5th edition of it, always making sure that all of the activities and the books and things that we recommend in it are fully up to date. But there's just a lot of information here, a lot of things students can do in the classroom to learn to appreciate and understand birds, chickens and other birds, but without actually hatching chickens in a mechanical, in a machine without any parent, a pathetic situation, a sterile and barren situation. And of course, we make these available to teachers, students, however many they want. We sell them, but we'll give them to anybody who will order them, anybody. And all of our literature is on our website. If you go to our website, just scroll down on the homepage to education. You'll come to this. It's available as a PDF and so on. So that'll conclude my presentation for now. And thank you.
I feel like, whether it's true or not, I feel that there is some sort of repression around talking about these things. I'm a sociologist. We construct our societies around animals, and we have no classes on it. We are on college campuses where the only animals we see are dead animals on plates, or they're hidden in vivisection labs. We are educating in environments where animals have use value, they don't have subjectivity, or they're completely erased, unless they're on the quad, right? There's rules against non-human animals in these situations. And there's, for those of us who are trying to work in these fields and who are trying to start our careers talking about these things, there is repression. There is a sense that we shouldn't talk about these things. I took a job because they said, human animal studies class, we should probably have one of those, you can teach it. And I was like, oh, thank God. But I now live in a place that's very rural and cold. I left Southern California for Southern Minnesota. So excited about this job. But everyone hunts, and so I can't just start teaching this class. I need to learn about the culture. I need to learn how to teach in an environment where no one's ever heard the word vegan, where I can talk about these issues in a way that people understand they're being given knowledge, they're not being told how to think or converted, which is an extra hurdle. So what I want to talk about today is I'm new. This is my first year. I was an applied sociologist working in the community for years. I'm now coming back to academia, and I'm starting to work through these problems. So unlike Karen, I haven't figured out what works, but I'm going to just try to do, and I hope you're timing me. They called me careless in grad school because I talked way too much. And we all knew the word garrulous because it was on like the GRE, right? So we'd all studied that word. So I'm going to try to do the greatest hits of some of the things I've seen, and then if anyone has questions or wants to bounce ideas off later, we're trying to leave much of this for just talking and answering questions. So one of the first things that I know as an anti-vivisection activist is that college students have very different attitudes than other people towards non-human animals. And one of the interesting things is, when it comes to vivisection, going to college flips you. High school and then college, the more education you get, it's the only animal issue on which the more education you get, the more support you have for animal abuse. So you're more likely to support vivisection the more education you have. Whereas other issues, you're more likely to be vegetarian the more education you have. This one's flipped. So I started thinking about it. I used to be a TA for statistics for year after year. Super not fun, but it was okay. And one of my struggles was reading examples from the book. I would always have to change the problem sets because I'm not going to reify animal abuse in my classes, right? So I'm always having to change the problem sets, rewrite questions, go through extra work that other TAs and professors didn't have to go through. And it got me thinking, there's things happening in school that is normalizing the objectification and devaluation of non-human animals. And we can see it easily. Animals aren't on campus unless we're eating them. When we experiment, our professors who are giving us grades, who have power over us, are experimenting on them. They are examples in textbooks, and by not just biology, but in math and in other textbooks. They're used as unproblematic examples. And we see this with a lot of social justice issues. For example, just today I had to change, I don't usually take questions from test banks, but I did it today because I wanted to focus on this, not on writing a test. And I had to change a question because it talked about weight. Like, why should a student facing an exam be given a question where that's the example? Why should we normalize animal abuse through problem sets? So the first thing that I try to do, and I don't know that I do it well yet, but I try to normalize compassion towards animals in my everyday teaching. So I teach methodological classes. I don't teach topical classes. I teach social research, an advanced class in applied sociology, and classes in human services like program planning. So how to design a good program that will help an agency. So the first thing I do is I use idioms and analogies that are not oppressive. So I don't say rule of thumb. I don't say kill two birds with one stone. I say free two birds with one key. When my students say rule of thumb, I say, well, let's talk about rule of thumb. So I'm teaching social research methods, but I say, that has a really oppressive history, and it's rooted in violence towards women. So let me tell you about it. And I try to just normalize things like that, just everyday things that pop up in the classroom that I may or may not be prepared for. I try to deal with it. I try to have thought about these issues beforehand. The other thing I do is I don't shy away from talking about animals. So I research social movements and I research human-animal interactions. And when I teach research methods, students learn the best through examples. All my colleagues use their own research for examples. So I do the same thing. So I just want to show you an example of what I do. So I'm teaching different methods. Now, I don't have an example of my own research. I often go to a colleague and say, can I see your notes or the way you did this research project? But when I teach I do content analysis. So this is an actual lecture I have in my class, and we learn about unobtrusive research. I don't know, who's a social scientist? Okay, I'm like, really looks familiar. So we're learning about unobtrusive research. I'm going through a really normal lecture, and I get to an example so we can work through these problems. And I don't shy away. I say, I'm a researcher who studies radicalism and animal rights. So let's talk about how I do that. And I actually show my students my research, and I have them read communiques. So content analysis is where you systematically code textual or visual data so that it can become numerical. So I actually let them read. Sorry, it's not the slideshow, but that's fine, not you with you guys, right? Do you want it as a slideshow? I don't know how to use these.
Bottom right.
Woo, okay. So I show them communiques, and we work through issues that don't have to do with the topic. We work through what sort of themes are you seeing? What are they talking about? I show them a different communique that has different themes. And we start talking about, well, what themes are there? What schemes are there? This is something I teach in research methods, and I don't shy away from using this example. Now, I don't intentionally implant these examples where it's not appropriate for me because maybe I don't have research on that topic. Then I go to maybe a colleague who's researched that topic and ask for their notes. But I like to teach with examples. So I show them, this is what a code book looks like. And I show them how I code things. This probably means nothing to you guys if you're not studying content analysis. And then I show them the data entry. So I work them through something that they need to learn, and I don't hide the fact that we're talking about animals. And I show them what it ends up looking like, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so another thing that I do is I like project-based learning, and I said, we want to do a survey. I don't want it to be useless. Here's a topic that will help me. I want to know attitudes about animals on our campus so that when I go into a classroom and teach human animal studies, I know what you're interested in and what your experiences are. And I said to the students, I'm vegan, and I don't agree with hunting, and half of you hunt, right? Yeah. I was like, help me ask questions that will help me understand that so that I can make sure I talk about the right issues so that all the students I talk to will feel like things they care about are being addressed. And my students who are hunters worked 5 times as hard on this topic, which was exactly opposite of what I expected, right? But just by being interested and letting them be researchers and engaged, they didn't care about the topic. And so they constructed this wonderful survey for me. We talked about why, we worked through how to do survey construction. So there was like a lot of workshops about technical things that I was teaching them. And they went out and they conducted a great survey for me. So I didn't need to talk about animals, and I don't with everything that I teach. But in these situations, it was useful and it was relevant. And so I feel like that is an easy way that we bring animals in. You can just normalize it by not hiding from it. So we talk about other social justice issues too, and I teach social methods through those. But at least once with one method, they had an opportunity to talk about non-human animals. The second thing I want to talk about, how much time do I have? Oh, a few minutes. Okay, so my first thing is I want to normalize non-human animals as an okay thing to talk about. Number one. Number two, and this leaves me with more questions than anything, I want to actively bring social justice into my classrooms, and I try very hard to do that. So in this first instance, I'm talking about normalizing non-human animals and not making a special effort to force them into the class, but where it's relevant, put them there. In my other classes with upper division students and graduate students, I fight to get social justice issues into my classroom. So I intentionally chose a school that allowed project-based learning models. I bridge, and I feel like this is a fundamental tenet of ICAS, of the Institute for Critical Animal Studies, whether you're talking about non-human animals or any social justice issues, to bridge the academy and activism. That is our job, I feel, as privileged people. And I'm lucky because I do applied sociology, so I get to very clearly and easily make that tie, but I think anyone can do it. It takes more work on our part. But I make sure that homework, when students are upper division and they already have a basic skill set, that their homework is not for nothing, that their homework is producing. So I regularly meet, and I do live in a human service hub, so this is easier for me than it will be for some people, but I regularly meet with community organizations. I find out what their needs are, and we construct projects in the class through project-based learning that will actually produce work for the organizations. As an educator, it's a bit more work because one, you have to do group learning, and group learning is a lot more work to make sure everyone gets really good stuff from it. But if you can figure it out right, I don't always do it right, but if you can get the groups right, students learn far more. And number two, you as an educator have to know so well what your learning outcomes are, because then you need to, for every group project that's happening in your class, maybe come up with new readings for them, different assignments, different timelines, and wrap the class around the final project so that they meet all their learning outcomes. But students are invested, they're learning about social justice, and they work harder than I've ever seen students learn. And I've only done this a few times, so I'm not an expert, but it's something that I'm liking and I want to keep working on. One of the issues with that, though, is ethical issues. So this is something I don't have an answer to. I don't always agree with everything that my community-based partners do. So we have done some amazing work, my students, not me, my students have done amazing work with some food justice programs and some programs working to deal with childhood hunger. They've done a needs assessment in our community. A group got funding to find out which population was most in need of having food insecurity reduced. And in another class, working with the same organization, they've gone about doing a resource assessment to figure out different programs that we can build off of and in conjunction with this program. And I will tell you that this food-based program is not feeding vegan food to children. So there are ethical issues that really, and I require my community partners to be for 10 weeks to show up to class for resource meetings for 1 hour and 15 minutes, which is a lot to ask for a community partner. So finding those community partners is challenging, but it's necessary for the students to learn, but I am running into ethical issues as I make these choices. So that's something that that I'm left with moving forward. And the last thing I'll say is that a very simple way is what Karen noted, is working with students on campus who are already interested. So whether you're a student or a graduate student or a professor, there are people who can be educated very easily and simply on a daily basis, but it can be a challenge. I had one student come to me last semester, and that one student graduated, and we have no more animal rights on campus. When I do my activism, I drive an hour and a half away to do it. So those, I guess, would be the three things that I would say is, one, as education, I would like us to start normalizing animals. Maybe not even a particular perspective towards animals, but just non-human animals exist in the world and they're erased from our institutions. So let's put them back there. Number two, let's actively seek out ways to bridge the academy and activism and make our students believe that that's their role in the world and to be inspired by that role. And number three, there's a lot of challenges and ethical issues. And unfortunately, I feel like anyone fighting for social justice or anyone in a disadvantaged position always has to do 5 times more work to get to the same place as the man. But we've got to do it, and we've got to do it now so future generations can already have a more level playing field. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, moving back to English as a discipline, I want to talk a little bit about a situation that I've come across. I teach literature and writing at a community college, but the main class I teach is like an introduction to writing, and how I try to incorporate animal issues, because it's not a philosophy class or an animal studies class, is to have them, there's always an occasion for writing. So for years I did something on body and culture, interrogating the body and things like that. And then, because this is my life to a great extent, I thought we can deal with some animal issues. So for the past 4 semesters, I've been using a textbook like this. This is Food Matters. It's an anthology. It has a chapter on ethics, so students are to read the articles and choose a topic. I used to use a different book, but it was published by Pearson, and they support the standardized testing when we get to, I just want to talk about really my struggles and ways that I think I've failed in some cases. I don't know if I failed yet, but I want to actually share some direct student responses. So since I've been doing this, I've been very open about the fact that I'm vegan, that I do activism, things of that nature, and what were happening course evaluations, and they're generally good, I have to say. But sometimes a student will say, like, I feel like she was pushing a vegan agenda. She made me feel guilty for eating animals, and I'm like, so I thought, okay, this semester I'm not going to mention. You know, I have a speaker come in, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and talk about veganism and ethics, that kind of ethical code. So I let her do the talking to offer that perspective. And so this chapter, there's of course, I think it's very well done. There's articles by Peter Singer, of course, shows up, Margaret Mead, Barbara King-Solver, who I'm going to mention in more detail, Gary Steiner, who I know is at this conference, Bill McKibben, Blake Hurst, and Sally Cohn, and they really do the whole range of animal issues and ethics. But there are some passages that students glom onto and use in their papers that are very hard for me. I'm telling them to use the research, and then when they use it, I want to tell them why they're wrong. And all of these kind of issues come up. So I just want to read a passage from this, couple passages from that really bother me the most, from Barbara King-Solver. You can't run away on harvest day. I just want to bite my hand off when I read some of this. Most of us, if we know even a little about where our food comes from, understand that every bite put into our mouths since infancy, barring the odd rock or marble, was formerly alive. The blunt biological truth is that we animals can only remain alive by eating other life. Plants are inherently more blameless, having been born with the talent of whipping up their own food, peacefully and without noise, out of sunshine, water, and the odd mineral ingredients sucked up through their toes. Strangely enough, it's the animals to which we've assigned some rights, while the saintly plants are maimed and beheaded with moral impunity. Who thinks to beg forgiveness while mowing the lawn? And I even have my note, joke, question mark, is this serious? And students will take that passage amongst all others that I've told them you should use these essays and say, well, look, plants are alive too, therefore anything goes. Another passage, the farm liberation fantasy simply reflects a modern cultural confusion about farm animals. They're human property, not just legally, but biologically. Over the millennia of our clever history, we created from wild progenitors whole new classes of beasts whose sole purpose was to feed us. If turned loose in the wild, they would haplessly starve, succumb to predation, and destroy the habitats and lives of most or all natural things. And there I just wrote the either-or fallacy, as if there's not other things we might be able to do. But I found that students will really use these passages to support things, and then I find myself wanting to argue with my students in their papers, and I don't know if that's fair, and that's going to be leading up to a question I'm going to throw out to the audience. So I want to share a student response to, they had an assignment where during a week where a speaker came in to talk about veganism, the ethical perspective with this issue of food ethics, and then they also watched 2 videos. So I want to read a bit of the student's response before I explain what the videos are. And I have to say, this student is one of my top students. He is great, respectful, but this is like, it actually is uncomfortable for me to read part of what he wrote, and also when I get to my response to him, it's uncomfortable, so bear with me. So he says, and I'll intercept with just some commentary. This week this is what he said, after watching the videos and hearing the speaker. This week, we are going to talk about animals and food ethics. You asked that we watch 2 videos to help us along the way. One video seemed to be created by Disney and took us on this fantastic journey where the cult vegan diet can change all the world's problems. The other video could have been created by Stephen King and took us on a dark and eerie path where the factory farm kills massive amounts of animals. So which video persuaded me to agree with their views? Neither. So let me just explain what the videos are. I don't know if people have seen, there's one called Vegan, A Life Connected. Yeah, it's a good video. It's not without its problems, but it really makes it sound in that kind of Disney fashion. If everyone goes vegan, environmental problems solved, world hunger solved, animal cruelty solved. And then where the other video is actually from the American Meat Institute, and I thought here I was, I'm going to show the other perspective, and I'm covered basically, by Temple Grandin. She's, and it takes the animal through her perfect, the most ideally run slaughterhouse. And I have them actually analyze these, not even like from like, are these persuasive, why or not? So there's other goals in this. So let me continue with what he said. If it was not obvious yet, I will start out admitting I am a meat eater, and I find this pro-vegan angle obnoxious and unfair. Eating meat is not synonymous with factory farming. This assignment, Animals and Food Ethics, needed one more video, and because of this, to me it misses the mark. This third video, a meat-eating video, would talk about 4 things: supporting local farms, retailers and communities, raising animals organically, providing animals free-range quality of life, harvesting properly, and slowing down the human consumption of animals. So here's someone who is, I was kind of maybe presenting this black and white image. He really is identifying this whole other thread, as we all know, in the animal rights movement, these discussions about humane, which I would call the humane myth. And I'll get to later why I explained to him why I didn't include that perspective. So, and I can also, if I were to cite, probably I think one of the best articles is a Boston News, Green Eggs and Ham, which I know is on your website as well, where it talks about locavorism and the myth of small farms and sustainability are very classist, they're sexist, and all these other reasons that, as a freshman composition class, he might be ready for, but not everybody is. So he continues, my aha moment is and has been the uneven playing field that vegans are playing on. The vegan diet is not free from sin. The vegan diet, I can't argue with this, negatively affects our ecological system and can be harmful to your overall diet. Well, maybe not that second part. The current state of the vegan diet is on a minuscule cult-like level. What happens if we did flip and switch and the vegan diet becomes everything for everyone? Will the vegan diet really have the ability to avoid world politics, corporate greed, and the need to mass produce? These are good questions. And he's responding to the A Life Connected video, which makes everything sound like it will be just, well, you'll hear how he says it. Will the vegan diet avoid land and animal destruction? Would this new world really be this vegan utopia with purple unicorns pooping perfect rainbows? And that was the title of his discussion. So, it is my opinion that vegans and meat eaters must kill animals to eat. However, food ethics is all about the way in which we kill our animals. Meat eaters and vegans need to be tolerant of each other's diets and focus on the real issues affecting food ethics. Together we can join forces and work towards removing politics, corporate greed, and overconsumption from our food system. Now, these are some great ideas, and I agree with some of it, but when reading a response like this, I ask myself, am I an activist? Am I an activist educator? Am I a traditional apolitical educator, which so many people are? So I wrote my response to him, which I'm going to end on, and then I have a final question, which maybe I'll read now, and then we can discuss it. I'm going to read my response, which once I reread it, I kind of cringed, because I feel like who is writing this? I think it's Kim with the position of authority, Kim who thinks she's an anarchist but is wielding her baton of authority as an angry activist who is very critical of the humane myth as it is offered in the U.S. So,
Are you critical of humane myth?
oh no, I mean I'm critical of the idea of humane meat. I'm not critical of humane myth. Yeah, thank you. That's important to note.
Record it right upstairs.
To be clear, I wouldn't think my response to him here is not good. But we're cool. He and I are good. He's writing a paper now on sustainable farming, and we need to reduce meat intake. So, I said, Michael, while I gave you full credit for the passion evident in your detailed response, please remember that class discussions are not to turn into forums to bash the teacher. This is me being overly sensitive. I don't know. You're calling my choice of videos obnoxious and unfair is so out of line as to be insulting and disrespectful. And to explain, I chose a video from the American Meat Institute to offer a pro-meat perspective, so I don't get your Stephen King comment. Why? Because 99 or more than 99% of Americans get their meat products from factory farms. So it is more honest to show that than a small family farm that doesn't represent the state of animal agriculture in the U.S. I hope that makes sense to you. Regardless, I will end with a reminder that I deserve to be treated with respect and I won't tolerate anything less from my students. And he really got upset. I mean, he's a returning student. He's like, no, this class has opened my mind. I've never been thinking like this before. And this was me being an activist. This response was coming from an activist who doesn't want to be laughed at when she's holding up a sign against the CERT. And that's who was responding. And I don't know how I would respond differently now, because I was responding from my gut. And I was just like, no, I'm right, you're wrong, is really what I was saying. So this is a question I want to throw out, and I can repeat it later, that I'd like people to discuss. And so for those who are classroom educators or educators of any kind, to what extent, if any, are CIS proponents obligated to give both sides or the gradation of the story in terms of animal issues? For example, if students are asked to read a pro-vegan essay, must we also give them a pro-meat essay? And again, there's a nice sampling here. If I invite a vegan speaker, am I obligated to invite a pro-meat speaker? But there's no organizations that are just pro-meat. We wouldn't have to pay someone a lot of money, like to the American pork producer or something like that. So when I had the person speak in class, I did say, okay, it might sound like you're only getting one side, one perspective, but remember, you all bring in the standard traditional perspective. So I let them know that's where that lies. That's how I tried to cover myself, because I felt like there are some gradations in different views. So yes, I just shared an epic fail, I think. But I look forward to hearing what other people think about what our duties are in the classroom. That's all for now.
I'm going to talk a little bit about
things. And then, as the other individuals kind of noted, what are you doing in class and what are you know, as an educator and pedagogue, engaging in? So, education and teaching was a violent place for me, and probably for a lot of people. I wanted to commit suicide a variety of times in my life. I went to special ed from K to 12. I learned how to read in 11th grade. You know, in that same time span, 11th, 10th grade, I went vegetarian, and then like a little bit later, went vegan, and it didn't take a book. I know like I work on a lot of books, but I think it's just kind of, I looked at a chicken after Thanksgiving, looked at my cat, looked at the chicken, said, I don't have any right to touch this chicken because I didn't ask this chicken. And so I didn't know like anything about milk, I didn't know anything about honey. I just knew that like if I didn't ask the bee, I can't take anything from the bee. And I think I still go with that philosophy with all these like wonderful books that are out there. It's just like you can't take without asking, and if that person hasn't allowed you to take, that goes with like Black liberation, feminism, etc. Right? So, so from that, I wrote an article in a book called Terrorist for Freedom Fighters, and said that you will never truly. And I was like one of these individuals, like, oh, I really love animals, but I don't want to be like one of these, like I guess I just came from like a more like punk and hip hop, like more like, you know, macho, machismo, kind of like, I don't want to be one of these like people that just like hug buddies. I want to be like, you know, I'm pissed, and I broke a lot of things, and that's the reason why my parents kept me out of my house from like 9 to 5. So I was like always outside breaking things because I couldn't speak that well. And so, so when I found out about this group called the Animal Liberation Front, I was like really excited because they like expressed themselves the same way I expressed myself. Not to say that I had anything to do with that group. Like I just like really embraced their way of expression. And a lot of my friends that had disabilities wrote things too, or hurt themselves. So I was like, wow. And I think that the article is like looking at critical analysis versus critical pedagogy. And I think that as Paulo Freire, Bell Hooks, Thich Nhat Hanh, a lot of them say like to really truly understand, you know, the need for liberation, one has to really love those that are marginalized, and you can't do it through an analytical kind of approach. And so, you know, if you really want to know the understanding of the ALF, you really got to understand what love is. And they don't do it through a machismo, even though there's a lot of articles about that, and for good reason. But I think that's kind of the point of liberation and liberation theology, and Paulo Freire and Bell Hooks, and that whole critical pedagogy camp. And so that's kind of where I began, and I thought that you know, the first individuals that really embraced me, besides my family, that couldn't handle me. And Kim always says like, I don't know how your mom handles you. And my sisters all say that too, because I broke everything and destroyed the house. But they did, and you know, I had my cat and the woods, and then later I created, helped create with others this field of equal ability, bringing visibility and animals and nature together. They're saying two things. Basically, the philosophy, you don't have to read a book, is that we're all interdependent and we're all different. There's no such thing as normal. And so, looking at that, I really wanted to kind of be the educator, not the teacher, because the teacher just like confesses at you instead of with you. And I wanted to be the educator that I did not find and I needed before other people were killing themselves, right? And so I try to learn and run around and do activities and throw balls around, and I teach a lot of sociology classes and education and criminology classes, and in those classes I teach a lot of issues around race and class. And so how do I, the question, coming back to this, conversation is, how do I bring, critical animal pedagogy or animal liberation into this discussion? And in like really briefly. So again, through this lens of like doing a lot of work in the academy around like police brutality, repression, you know, anti-racism. I'm teaching 3 classes right now on like anti-racism, which is like awesome because of the Black Lives Matter and Ferguson movement that's going on. So I'm really blessed in that way. And so, and I say, hey, everybody, you know, what is like the typical, you know, rant that people that are in the protest like call cops? They're like, oh, like pigs. And I was like, yeah, like why? And I was like, pigs are a lot nicer than cops. And, you know, pigs are just like, you know, sloppy. And, you know, you can't hate, you know, somebody for being sloppy. And I was like, well, what if like, and then we talk about, you know, education and K to 12, and I said, what do you call, and I made a PowerPoint, I should show it to you like later because I always show it like or a video, it's like 2 minutes long. But I said, what do you call a kid that picks on another kid?
Bully?
A bully. And I was like, a bully, and I made a video because I was like pissed off at all these educators in the field of education calling like people bullies. I was like, no. First, like from a critical, like pedagogical perspective, you're victimizing youth rather than taking ownership of a system that is, isn't it interesting, the same kids that get pushed out of school, that are incarcerated, and that are bullied are LGBTQ kids, kids that are of color, kids that are economically disadvantaged, and kids with disabilities. And in all those 3 segments, like, it's not about being bullied, it's about oppression. But we don't want to talk about oppression because we're in a neoliberal educational system, right? And so I was like, pigs are really good animals. Bulls are like vegetarians and they just like walk around if you don't tie their like, you know, scrotums up and like jump on them for like 10 seconds. So we really need to understand that these creatures are very peaceful animals and you're stigmatizing them. So I was like, what if somebody in a movement, and we started talking about a variety of social movements, I said, what if somebody in the movement, you know, like snitches on another person? Oh, they're a rat. And I was like, yeah, but like rats are, again, you know, I go through this whole philosophy of like, they're really smart, they're really nice, you know, they mind the business, you know, unless you like, you know, put traps out. So, and then again, there's the wonderful religion aspect of snakes. And so I kind of bring all these different species together when talking about police brutality and like issues of political repression. And with being subversive in, you know, trying to defend, you know, the stigmatization of so many animals, right? And so those are like one thing that I do subversively, talking about, you know, the stigmatization of animals, which is very important when you talk about how people are oppressed. Stigmatization is like the first level. And then bringing people in to talk, and then I would say readings, as kind of you all kind of noted. Outside, I do a lot of work with youth that are incarcerated, and there's like a Save the Kids table named by kids, and it was created by 4 youth that were incarcerated. And so I did a lot of volunteering in detention centers throughout the country, and I still do on a weekly basis. And so I have 2 kind of stories. Do I have a little bit of time? Or? Okay. So I have a quick. Okay, great. So I have 2 stories, and a lot of the kids, I really love working in detention centers because a lot of them are forced there because they think differently, act differently, but they're brilliant. The most brilliant people on this planet in modern history have all gone through the walls of prisons. Like, think of like Rosa Parks and Nelson Mandela, like Mumia Abu-Jamal, John Muntekim, like the list goes on. Rosa, like, they all went through prison. So I always tell them the most brilliant people on this planet have all been in prison, right? And so some bad people too, but like we got some good people going too, right? So anyway, so I'm talking to these young kids, and I said, and they asked me, why don't you eat this soup? And I'm like eating with them, like in the cafeteria, and I said, oh, there's puppy paws in it. And they said, puppy paws? And I said, yeah, there's puppy paws. And they said, oh, I'm not gonna eat that. And another detention center person went inside, and they said, and his name was Zach. And bless his heart, I don't know where he is to this day, but the system, I believe, has him. But he's sitting down with me, and Zach's sitting with me, and he says, yo, and he mentioned somebody else, and he says, yo, is there puppy paws in this? You know, the cellist says there's puppy paws. And he says, yeah, there's puppy paws. He asked another person, there's puppy paws. And they said, yeah. And he says, and then like at the end of the conversation, he says, there's really not puppy paws in this, really? And I said, no, but does it really matter like what calls are in this or what kind of meat are in this? And he says, what do you mean? I was like, there's like cow meat in here, right? And he says, oh, and then we begin like a private conversation about these things, right? And I think that's like how I, you know, in a jokingly way in the youth detention centers kind of bring up these important, like very difficult conversations. Last story, and then I'll kind of wrap up. When we're looking and dealing with like all this academic repression of being marginalized, and I think we kind of talked about that, but we're not allowed to talk about these issues like directly, or we'll be kind of silenced in a lot of institutions, right? Because of the powers that be being vivisection in institutions. But that's the goal of critical studies, right? So like if we were to have this book, you know, our job is, if this table is the academy in higher education, the more we speak about critical studies and animal liberation, the less space that vivisection and agriculture industry has, and they'll fall off one day, and they won't be here. But people only know how to slaughter animals at a large rate or how to vivisect on college campuses, right? So we need to stop. You know, this is where the beast is, and that's why you have great organizations like Progress for Science and protests at UCLA, because they know if they protest UCLA, they're going to stop educating for 20 more, some odd years for all these other horrible industries. But the last story is I teach a group building conflict resolution thing for youth, sometimes on the weekends. And afterwards, and I talked to like other animal liberationists about this, and I went to Canada and like talked about this, and I got a lot of pushback in Toronto about this. And I still hold to this principle to this day, and I would like you all to push back on me, is that at the end of the day, they have their opportunity. We did like this conflict resolution, we did a certificate, their name was on it, it was really awesome. It was like volunteer, and like we did like the musical chairs, and like all these really fun things at the very end. And then they have the opportunity, I said, hey, you can choose any food you want. And they said, they typically ask for like pepperoni pizza, and they ask for chicken fried rice. And at that moment, I can put on my vegan, like militant, you know, badass hat and say, you all are gonna eat tofu. But they don't even know. Or I could be like an anti-oppressive total liberation person. You just say like, that's what they want. But there's a longer conversation going on that I have an opportunity to talk to them. But I don't want to be another warden or oppressive institution or individual in their life to say, I'm going to dictate. Now, you came here on a volunteer basis for 8 hours. Now I'm going to dictate to you what you eat and what you don't eat. And I don't want to do that. So I allow them to buy or like, you know, pick whatever they want, and then, you know, a number of us go out and buy it for them. But then we kind of go down and have this opportunity to kind of talk about these things later. And you know, I think that's the, you know, the issue that we need to, we can't, true education is not forced, it's voluntary, right? And I think that's what we really need to understand. It's a liberatory, voluntary process. So that's what I would like to say.
So at this point, we can either start bouncing back and forth with each other, but what might be a lot more fun would be if you guys had questions for us.
Or answers.
Or answers to our
Questions
questions.
that,
You teach, right? And why don't you tell us about what you teach in the classroom? If you don't mind, you can call on.
Yeah, well, it's hard to get a job, you know, when you're an animal rights person. But when I was hired at the university, I was an activist, but I wasn't an animal rights scholar. So I went in kind of closeted. So, and I've been talking about it a bit in my classes, but it wasn't like real overt in every class like it is now. Now it's like central every time I teach, and it's easy to make it that. So, I think unfortunately for a lot of young scholars, it's very difficult to find jobs doing scholarship, master's thesis, and dissertations, because who's going to hire that person? There's not very many jobs. So it was easy that I was privileged to become very radical at the same time I was being tenured. Even though now I'm persona non grata on campus because of all my animal politics, I'm there. So, but I think more to the point is, I guess, the way that I approach my classes. I'm a sociologist, so I approach the topic by talking about how all of reality is socially constructed, largely constructed by elites. We've all been socialized and programmed to see the world in a certain way. And it's going to be, this is a class of liberation that we're going to talk about how we're going to deconstruct this. So that's how I approach all of my classes when we work in animals. But my Animals in Society class, then we bring in immediately, you know, how we've been raised to think about other animals. And I don't feel, like Kim was saying, I don't feel like I have to present both sides. I take the position that you have already been programmed, and your teachers have been Tyson, and your teachers have been Ronald McDonald, and you've been programmed, and you've been hurt by it, animals have been hurt by it, the world. So we're going to look at it from an animal liberation perspective. So if this was a course in Black Studies, you're not going to come in with like a racist perspective, right? So why in this class on Animals in Society do I have to say, well, let's look at the species, let's let them, you've already heard that. So I dispense with all that and just, I talk about depression of animals, I tie it to, I talk about entangled depression, how they've been hurt by it, how people have been hurt by it historically, and how they're hurt by it now, and the future's going to be devastated if we continue down that path. So, I approach it that way.
I could just add to that. I'm a junior faculty member, so I teach English at a number of people on the panel, and I've just started working issues of animal activism into the classroom, and I'm already getting some pushback from the students. And it's very scary when you're not tenured. So when I'm tenured, things might change a little bit. But I'm also a rural campus, it's really, it's hunting centric. It's very. I'm going to be talking a lot about this in my presentation tomorrow, so I don't want to say too much now. But I mean, in response to his question about whether to present both sides of the story, I don't think there are two sides here. I think that this is kind of the myth of the 50-50. That if you present the vegan argument, you have to present the meat-eating argument. And the fact is, that's the status quo. Like you just said, it's the pre-programmed to think this way. And the other side, right, the vegan side, is the one that's being silenced. And if you consider, for instance, I'll be talking a little bit about my research on Alice Walker tomorrow. Her classic essay, Am I Blue, that's been used in a lot of vegan circles, been banned because it has, quote, an anti-meat eating agenda. That was the reason that it was banned in the California Board of Education standardized tests, and for that reason. So you have this sort of, program status quo positions. It's not really an argument that you present both sides, I don't think, right there.
Yeah, I felt like should I have presented the human, then it gets like, well, there's all these, was it subconscious that I purposely, but I don't believe in that,
So here's what I would say.
Yeah.
Or here's what I will say.
like
Is that I don't think, when I publish stuff, I study civil rights movement, I study the animal rights movement when I'm studying social movements, and I never have to prove that I never have to excuse myself for being a raging anti-racist to a journal, a mainstream sociology journal, when I want to publish something about the civil rights movement. But I sure as hell have to do that when I publish about the animal rights movement. And my methods have to be on spot, and I have to prove that I'm 5 times as good as a researcher as someone else to get that in. So I don't think that we have to present things 50-50 because we are already entrenched in worlds, as I think everyone agrees, where it's 100% normative to disrespect, objectify, torture, kill, and ignore the pain of non-human animals. The problem is when we're talking about pedagogy, and that's where my struggle comes in, because I'm also on a rural campus, not as rural as yours. I'm so happy to hear that, not like I'm happy for your situation, but I'm like, oh, it could be even smaller. But I am on a campus where they say, here's the start of the hunting seasons. Don't schedule anything on a starter. And I'm like, oh, that's a good thing to have a test, because no one's going to come to class, and people are showing up to class in their camo, and there's dead animals on groups of cars coming by, and people use hunting as examples, like for test questions, like, oh, I'm happiest when I hunt, and blah, blah, blah. And know that particularly with higher ed, so you're more concerned with the whole life of an individual when you're doing high school or junior high. In higher ed, our job is to push critical thinking and plant new seeds of knowledge, and to somehow convince these students that they actually want to do the work to become engaged with the new ideas. Because we can give them 100 readings, but unless they read them and think about them, they're going to learn nothing, right? So my concern, and I don't know that there's an answer to this, is if we don't at least appear to nod our head towards the violence that they're already so comfortable with, they're going to feel attacked, and then start thinking, well, you have an agenda, and of course I have an agenda. I have an agenda to make my students critical thinkers, whether I'm teaching about, research methods, or whether I'm teaching about non-human animals. So my concern is if you don't nod your head towards giving them formal learning on this thing that they've been learning their whole lives, do they shut down? This is not an answer, it's a question I don't understand. Do they shut down? Because I think when students feel that you're trying to force them into something that they're not interested in, they really react negatively and don't learn. That's why I love that when I was so honest with my students, like, I'm about to teach about animals and half the time they became engaged, right? They were like, oh, let us tell you what you have to ask. And I actually learned a lot. Like, I didn't understand women's role in hunting, and I read, like, rule and all sorts of stuff. I didn't understand that the women I was teaching have to go hunting because they want boyfriends. And that's what they have to do on the weekends with their boyfriends. So I learned that from them. And so now I'm terrified to go teach it because I certainly don't want to open up a class where I reify or normalize animal abuse. But my fear is if I don't nod my head towards it and give them something formal about it, do they shut down and say, being a professor, agenda, no way, not reading it. I'm not going to buy into that. So that's my main fear. And I think as a white male, I will say that you have a position of authority walking into that room. And as a 33-year-old female professor, I'm already discounted in 1,000 ways.
Yes, thank you so much for your call because it is making me think how I can be a more tolerant educator. Because when I talk about animals, I have a hard time with the hunters. And but I will try to say what I'm trying to say. When I heard Anthony speaking about foul play, I've been looking at foul play since I began teaching a long time ago when I was not even, unfortunately that time existed, when I was not thinking about animal studies. Because, and quoting him, I've never been a traditional, a political educator. So I came across very strong. I've been here in the United States for 18 years now, teaching language, but whenever I have the opportunity, I talk about all social changes that I can. And I think I'm tolerant with the meat eaters and they bring their milk to class, they drink milk as if it was water. But I can't take the hunters. And then when you're talking about you have half of your class, they're hunters, I feel that I block them when they talk about hunting and they want to have their oral presentations about their hunting experiences and how the animals they killed. And I really don't know what to do. I just can't keep it. I think it's too painful. And perhaps it has to do with my background. I cannot imagine going to a college where people they hunt.
What is your field?
Oh, I teach Portuguese.
Oh, you teach Portuguese?
Yes. At the military academy.
Okay.
I was one. But I have to defend my cadets because I was just telling Loretta, I think they are as oppressed as everybody. So it's not because they are military.
But do you include essays? What kinds of?
Well, I'm very limited because I teach language, and I teach the basic levels. I'm not teaching the upper level.
But do you teach essays, or what kind of writings do you bring into your?
Yes, as I said, I'm just teaching the basic levels of language, so I don't really have the opportunity of reading essays.
So you use a textbook, right?
Yeah,
Do you run into like stuff you're
Oh, yeah,
uncomfortable
of
with?
course. As a sport that is typical in Portugal, wait a minute, half of the country, even more than half of the majority of the Portuguese are against fighting. It's more common in Spain, but there are so many activists in Spain who are against the fighting, and our textbook present as a sport. It's very common. It's very oppressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, kind of like follow
following up on that, I'm terrified to teach anything to do with even animal welfare. Let's not even talk about liberation, right? Precisely because, one, I care about it very much, and it's very emotionally draining for me to be laughed at or disrespected about this issue, because it makes you feel even more like, holy shit, we're never going to win, things are never going to change, you know, here's the proof, right? I've had that one experience, and I don't want to go through it again, so there's like that issue. There's also, for me, issues about like safety in the classroom, not related to animal rights stuff at all, but other things that have really set off some of my students, where it was like, my bodily integrity was in question for a moment, you know, and when you're an adjunct like me, you're kind of like freelancing, you don't really have a meaningful relationship with your departments, or there's really nowhere you can go, except for to the police, and then you're like, do I want the police involved in this, you know, like that's always a problem. So there's like that set of concerns for me, but there's also like the pedagogical concern of when you talk to people about animal welfare, animal rights, you're trying to talk to a part of them that's been killed, right? It's almost dead. It's like trying to breathe life into compassion, you know? Because I really do think we've been socialized not to feel and not to care. And on the one hand, we know if there's emotional distress, people can't learn, right? That is, if they're hungry, if they're in an abusive situation, there's just no learning that's possible, because that's the primary concern. So we know we need to address people's emotional needs before we can actually do any learning. And I'm trying to figure out how can I do that in my classroom in the time that I have, right? And focus that healing on the relationship that we have to animals, right? And getting people to talk about maybe the first time they watched Babe or read Ferdinand the Bull, right? Which for me was like such an important story, right? How can we think about animals differently? What are they like from the inside of their minds, you know? So I teach philosophy, ethics in particular, and I'm looking for pieces that are short, that are emotionally charged, right? That get at that feeling that people have, so that they can maybe read something, say, by, you know, Karen Davis, right, or Carol Adams, and have it mean something to them, and not be something that they just throw away, right, or have such a strong reaction to that they don't get anything out of it. Because I haven't found that yet, you know. I've had lots of rejection, so many failures. We can talk about that later. But I'm looking for segue pieces that just get people where it matters, you know, without telling them necessarily about what they should eat or.
I really think a struggle, I'm guessing, a struggle you have too is there is a false dichotomy between the idea of rationality and emotionality, and a sense that when we act off of emotion, we are not having a real, honest, intellectual response to something. And I don't know what you teach, but I wonder if even just introducing the idea of the dichotomy, the false dichotomy between emotion and ration, and then giving people emotional pieces and saying, what pieces of your intellect what emotions did this rise, what pieces of your intellect did it present, might be a way to talk about social justice and animals. And the thing about safety, I think you should reach out to someone. I've adjuncted, and I've now not adjuncting, and I've had safety issues before, and I know it's much easier to deal with when you're embedded, but I think you should talk to someone in your department.
Like that, unfortunately, came out of my hands. The police did get involved, you know.
Well, if you don't mind saying so, or even you, what does it mean to have safety issues as a teacher in your college classroom? I mean, what kind of safety issues are you you felt threatened by your own students?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, chair throwing, stuff like that.
From college students?
Yeah. Right, you don't know like what their issues are, right? You don't know what they have going on or whatever, and I don't think there's any like just way, right, to determine is this a classroom that's safe for me.
But was this this activity, was this in response to an idea you presented, or was it just random violence, or what?
It would be hard to say, right? I couldn't determine, you know. I would hate to think that I would know what was going on with somebody else psychologically. It would make me understand their behavior. But I know that that's a fairly common experience, particularly for young women who teach it.
I think it's a common experience for young female faculty, and I think that puts us at more risk when we talk about, number one, we were talking about tenure. I think that we have a lot more risk when it comes to, we have a lot more challenges teaching difficult things, because there's an era of authority that males just are handed in classes. And then number two, most students hold themselves accountable, but some students, and it's a minority, I think, have issues of blame. And I think when you're a young female professor, particularly older white students have been male students have been my problem. They have blamed, I mean, I've had like screaming, it's always for me been over grade issues, and I've always brought in a male faculty to assert that I'm an expert in the field and I'm the best person to teach the class, and that has always sadly been the thing that's resolved the issue, is having me openly say to the student and CCing a male faculty on an email, hey, there's lots of routes for complaints, here's someone who can help you through that, and then as soon as that person says, she's a really popular teacher, she really knows what she's talking about, but if you want to file a complaint, that's great. And I'll be in all your meetings with her moving forward for her own safety. That's always stops.
And I have to say, just to share my own story, which is interesting how different topics arise. When I was a writing center director for a couple of years, and I had an incident with a student, the same thing happened. He was probably intoxicated, I think we figured out, but he was sending me more and more aggressive and threatening. I mean, you could threaten over me like all caps, 100 exclamation points, and it was just so interesting. The second I forwarded them to my dean, and my dean just is a man, has a male, has the, his name is Jeff. As soon as my dean intercepted, he stopped. So I've experienced that as well, and then they had to have a policy on campus that even though he did come see me again, but that's a whole other issue, that he was not allowed to interact with me at all anymore. And his recourse was he could only talk to the dean, and that seemed to be the only thing to calm him down. I don't know, there's at least 3 women in this room who have undergone this on a college campus, so I'm sure it's more rampant than maybe people talk about. Were you just listening?
And I think it's going to happen more when you talk about animal issues, because there's great work by Annie Potts that talks about how one of the ways we can value the idea of animal equality is by feminizing people and then threatening rape. I think, do you mind if I out you?
No, no.
She's currently being attacked and having basically rape threats made and violent attacks made through social media to her as a way to silence her activism. And so I think that when it's usually people in disadvantaged positions that are teaching social justice issues, because something in us has made us want to do this. Now, when it comes to animal studies, I think it tends to be white people because it's that position of privilege that allows us to be the door openers, but it's all men, young women who are coming in and talking about these issues and trying to make the way for this as a discipline. And so I think a lot of these different inequalities intersect, and we know that, or maybe we don't, but we talk about the ways that the way we have oppressed minorities, be it by gender, race, ethnicity, or sexual orientation, has been by trying to equate them to non-human animals and to use that as if it's an insult to devalue and to lower. And so we have all these problems of the way we talk about all these social justice issues wrapped up together. And so I think when you have someone who is a young professor, a female professor, a professor who's not white, talking about these issues, I think there's challenges to authority that come wrapped up with the emotional responses to being faced with. One, when we talk about social justice, we're all culpable of violating someone's rights. So when you talk about how you treated animals, when you talk about racism, when you talk about sexism, we have all been culpable of these violations. So people are already feeling vulnerable. And then we have someone, and this is just my thought, but we have someone in this position of authority who you feel like you can disrespect their authority because they don't hold the traditional locations of who we listen to, who we don't. It becomes particularly problematic. And I think as an adjunct faculty, you hold a disadvantage because you are treated in a very poor way by the institution. You are not given good classroom times. You're not given safe classroom spaces. So often you're the only one on campus. And they don't see your name on anything else. So you can even more easily other disadvantaged and placed in a position that's not safe.
It sounds like a woman working from 11 to 7 in a all-night convenience store. There she is, all by herself.
Yeah.
I will say most of my students don't create these problems for me.
Right, yeah, it's only the one.
Most of my
Right? How
students
many
are
semesters
amazing.
do you have where nothing happens and everything is wonderful
Right.
and beautiful? Almost all the time. And then, one thing happens and you're like,
through educating, you're just like, oh, if every day could be like this. And there's 1% of the population who takes 80% of your time and creates learning disadvantage for other people. So it's like always a minority, but it becomes this huge thing. And then that's a problem because when you're educating, it's the silence where you don't know what's happening, the void of silence where you have students who are thinking, who are engaged, but maybe are afraid to speak up or maybe don't get the attention they need because they're still working through things, but you have students who are causing disruption that holds you back from learning about what these other students are thinking and giving them space, because that's where you learn the most with these issues, is where a voice who hasn't been heard speaks up in class and educates the rest of the class.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up, and your points about students being sort of dead in their compassion area. I'm lucky enough to teach in an urban university where people do work a lot on social justice issues. So maybe, I don't know, maybe they have a tiny bit more compassion than other people, but I'm not so sure about that. And so, yes, I've been under threat at certain moments in my career. I'm lucky enough to be older now, so I don't get some of the pushback that I got when I was in my 30s. But for me, I guess as pedagogically, the dynamics of a classroom are always a fascinating space, and I can usually try to get the students to respond to each other, and that's so much more effective, right? They're not going to listen to me if I say, I do this or I believe in that, but they'll listen to each other. So if somebody says something that's, resistant, we had it a couple weeks ago where a student was speaking, we were doing the jungle. Well, the people in the jungle, they had options, they had choices.
Are you talking about the book, The Jungle?
Yeah, the novel, The Jungle. And I said, look, Loretta, you better check her out, right? And the other students got this one very resistant student engaged, and it turned into a good conversation. So if it's a real security threat, no, you can't do that. But I've had a lot of students put the disruptive person in their place also. They don't want to see their teacher in trouble most of the time. So, yay for students.
I think that's a really good point too, because I think that we become, the older we get or the longer we do it, the more detached we get. Like our students stay the same age, and we just get like older and older, more and more distant from what it was like to be a student. So if you let students, but I have a challenge doing it because I get really nervous, like, well, what if someone says something racist or sexist or specious and I don't know how to respond? But I think if you can let students take over, and I'm not successful at this, so anyone who wants to workshop 101 me, please help me. But if you can let students take over the conversation and provide that platform where they can teach and learn from each other, that seems like a really ideal way to talk about these issues.
So, I just off of what Kim's campaign, and I noted to the guy, because people don't know about me, they can talk to the guy, or us later, but he made some kind comments on Facebook, back and forth. Facebook's not a good way to communicate, FYI. I'm sure I'm
Especially with people you don't know who.
Yeah, so he said he's gonna destroy Kim and make her into.
Cut up my body, make me into cunt raw.
Yeah.
He's gonna put his meat on your grill.
Yeah, he's gonna put his meat on my grill, put me in his lamb.
Well, why would you, in particular, if you're elicit that kind of Facebook? I'm just saying, I've never had an experience like that.
I just by happenstance, I happened to be the last person to have posted stuff. Well, actually, it was me and a gentleman from the UK, but I was the one who got the attacks as far as gender and sexuality. I just happened to be the last post on a restaurant review once they overturned the ban in California
Yeah.
of foie gras.
Right.
And so we were commenting on this restaurant. Wasn't even associated with the restaurant. And then
He was a commenter, or is that?
yeah, he just,
Okay.
it was totally random. He didn't know who I was, I didn't know who he was. It started a big backlash, and he got fired from his chef position within 24 hours.
Because of the Facebook exchange of
Yeah.
comments.
Yeah, people were complaining.
And he still kept on going after Kim and then Kim was like, why is he going after me? Even though you with me, and like, you know, and
Because I didn't create the campaign.
no, I did, and I told him I did. And I said, I made a meme about you too, and I sent it to him. And it was like just a quote of him and like him cooking like, I don't know, his body. No, it was like salad. And then like, but he was like nice to me, but would attack him. And we were like, the only reason is because, you know, we can like fathom is that Kim's a woman. And like, but I had like faith, like we were like looking at it, I was like, I took accountability, I wrote like a message, you just like would not come after me. And it was just like, this is just another example of like, hey, this is like, oh, we're boys here, you know?
Yeah, he just won't, like, I was talking to Pamela before, like, I'm his white whale, I'm his I am the source for all of his problems now. I never even wrote a review of his restaurant, I never called his restaurant. I didn't do anything, and he just will not stop. It's like, he's fixated that I've ruined his life. I didn't even want him to get fired. Now I'm kind of like, I don't like, this guy scares me, so I'm not really upset that something bad happened that he brought on himself. But yeah, I just have to deal with whatever comes up.
So is there anything else here about the classroom or education anybody wants to talk about or ask about? Yes.
I think it would be helpful to hear success stories, right? Something that went well, or a student or someone in the audience, right, who really opened up. Or I'd love to hear something positive.
Well, I think we should just review this. We shouldn't end on a negative note, but this was a very positive panel. Like, Karen has had so much great experience educating. I mean, you've been on like national talk shows because people have gone to your sanctuary, and at least your sanctuary has been, right, and changed their minds.
But one good example, and he went, well, everybody's a student in a way, in an area that they're just learning about. But, and I've had many examples, but this is kind of an epitome of what can happen where somebody you get into, you're in a conflict with somebody, in our case about chickens, let's say, and you don't really know what their response is after you've met them and talked with them in person or on the internet or whatever. And then lo and behold, they end up giving you the great news that they become vegetarian or vegan as a result of meeting you, or they never thought they'd hear about a chicken. So the person I'm talking about is Ira Glass of This American Life. How many people know who Ira Glass is? Well, very quickly, Ira Glass, every fall between Thanksgiving and Christmas, would run this show on This American Life called the Poultry Slam. And it would be this group of voices, all of whom would just be telling their stories about chickens and turkeys and ducks. All of them mean-spirited, nasty, and false, false in the representation, and just a miserable attitude. So we started a campaign. This was in the mid-1990s. I had our members write, and I wrote, of course, too. So I said, write to Ira Glass, send him your pictures and your stories about your chickens, and help him to see who these birds are compared to this, these images that your voices, this collection of voices you bring on every year on the Poultry Slam, is representing. So, of course, people jumped at that, There are a lot of people out there who love chickens and have loving relationships and tons of pictures, just like their baby pictures, and me too. So we all went after Ira Glass. And so after a couple of years of this, I got a call from his producer asking me if I would like to be the sort of counter voice or something, the one stuck in amongst all the bad voices. I would be the champion of the chicken and the turkey. So I said I would consider doing that on condition that Ira Glass agrees to come to our sanctuary and actually meet our chicken on his show. So he came. And we spent a couple of hours talking in our house about, it's our headquarters, about the birds and about all the issues surrounding them and everything. And he took, we went out in the chicken yard, and he saw the chickens, he met the chickens. And he was very cordial, and we ended on a very cordial note, and I was a voice in, really, I think it was the last new show that they ever made about the of the Poultry Slam. But About a year and a half later, I get an email from somebody saying, do you know that last night Ira Glass was on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me on NPR? And he was talking about this lady, he thought this crazy lady who started making people write to him about their chickens. And he said, you know, and I thought, gee, what a terrible activist she is, because how is she ever going to get anybody to care about chickens? So the upshot of what he said was, that meeting our chickens caused him to become vegetarian. And then he was on Late Night with David Letterman. And there, before millions of people, he started out telling his story about this crazy lady and how he said, what's an Armageddon, you know, and how are you ever going to get anybody to care, you know, change and everything. And everybody in the audience is laughing, hee-haw, and everything, you know. And I don't mean hee-haw in a negative sense of anything like that, excuse me. You have to be really careful. Which is good. But then the story became more serious as he told it. And finally, when David Letterman said to him, so what'd you do, become a vegetarian? And he said, well, yeah, I did. He said, I met the chickens, and he said, and I saw some where they were shy, some were outgoing, they had different personalities. And now the audience is totally quiet, so this is serious, he means it. So I bring him out a lot of times, but we have, of course, the whole thing right on our website. You can watch it for yourself. But I bring it up a lot of times to people because I give a lot of talks to animal activists who often feel very dispirited about the difficulty of getting people to care about animals and to want to change in response to caring, if they do care, if you can get them to care. And I said, you know, this just epitomizes the many conversations that you will have if you're confident as an activist. If you know your material, you know your issues, you know your animals, you have those facts, and you have that confidence, and you have that passion that you're bringing out, you're going to reach people who turn away from you when you're done talking to you. You will never realize that you changed them. Maybe not at that moment. But I've met so many people over the years who have said to me, you know, when I first talked to you at whatever it was, a tabling, an exhibit, or a conference, or it could have been anywhere, out on the street distributing literature, you know, and I just really, you know, you told me what you thought, and you know, it had an effect. But you know that cost, you know, I'm vegetarian now, or I'm vegan now. I've talked to people who look at you so stony-faced when, if I'm wearing my button that says, stick up for chickens. It doesn't say go vegan, it just says stick up for chickens, because then people say, what does that mean, stick up for chickens? Because I'm not telling them, I want them to ask. Now I'm ready to tell them. And you know, sometimes they'll be like, sort of morose. This is where your opportunity comes. To not assume, not treat anybody like a foregone conclusion. When we go toward the public, toward members of the public, with an assumption they're not going to care, we create that as a negative self-fulfilling prophecy. It's the worst thing we can do. We have to be confident and positive and upbeat. And that doesn't mean not being firm and serious, but we've got to be. We've got to assume that there's something in people that we can elicit. We have to bring that out of them. So I would start telling people, yeah, it means respect chickens, and yeah, don't eat them. I've had people say to me, you know, when I was a child, I had this rooster, and all of a sudden their whole personality is changing. I mean, I'm not even suggesting to everybody here that everything is just like, oh, you just go with the right attitude and everybody's going to transform as a result. I'm not saying that at all. I'm as aware as anybody in this room of the difficulties that we face, that chickens, and just right over there at the little bagel place, like 3 out of 4 choices are chicken this and chicken that, you know. So, you know, chicken everywhere, it's horrible. So I don't have any illusions about what chickens are up against, what animals are up against, what activists are up against. But I do know that we can have a tremendous effect on people for better or worse, depending on the attitude that we bring to each situation where we're with a member of the public or the public in a larger sense, and have a chance to elicit in them something that maybe they didn't even know they felt until that engagement took place. So we can never assume they're never going to care. If we take that attitude with people, we're going to make that be the case. But we can't do that. The animals can't afford us to do that because we're their ambassadors, we're their vicarious of them. We have to be positive, and we have to believe in them, and we have to show people that it matters to care about animals, and that animals themselves matter. We never want to say things like, well, I know people think I'm crazy for caring about a chicken, but I mean, that is, you don't start off apologizing. If you don't apologize. Successful, capable people do not apologize for what they value. Never. And as animal activists, that's one of our worst sins, really, because I've been in the movement for over 30 years. And it's the worst thing, because if you don't have confidence in what you're doing, all of the other virtues just don't manifest. Thank you.
I believe that's a good
Yeah, I
education.
feel that too. I feel that too.
So, on that note,
All right, thank you.